Thank you for joining us today on the first episode of ALTIUS Answers. We're extremely excited to roll out our podcasts, and we look forward to bringing innovative and important topics to you surrounding healthcare. Today, I'm joined by Michael Evans, principal and owner of Revenue Cycle Solutions, and we're going to talk about a lot of different topics, but they're going to range from strategy to change management, and most importantly, what should you do today as a healthcare executive to prepare you for the future? So thank you so much for joining us today, Mike. I'm really excited about our conversation. I think we're going to be able to deliver a lot of value to our viewers.
Thanks, Stephanie. It's nice to be here with you.
Now, before we get started, everyone chooses healthcare for a different reason, and I think that a lot of people in the industry would agree that we're really driven to move into healthcare based off of something that happened in our life.
Sure, that's very true. And the same thing happened with me. Actually, after I graduated from college, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, so I actually accepted a job coaching lacrosse up at Dartmouth College. And so I was an assistant coach there, and while I was coaching, the head coach actually got me a job in the local hospital, Mary Hitchcock Memorial. And I worked in the engineering department and got exposure to all aspects of the hospital. And meeting with board members, physicians, dietitians, housekeepers, maintenance folks, and I just loved the diversity of the people that I met, the complexity of the issues that they dealt with, and I thought this would be a great environment for me. I really enjoyed meeting a lot of different people in that environment.
That's fantastic. I always find it interesting to hear how people evolved into healthcare, because I feel like, we tend to not necessarily choose our destiny chooses us.
Right.
And it sounds like that resonates with you as well.
Yeah, and from that point on, I enjoyed it so much, and I got the recommendation from the leadership of that hospital that if I wanted to pursue this long term, I should really go to grad school. So from that point on, I pursued that, went to graduate school, got into a residency program, and have been in the business ever since.
Excellent. Well, you can tell a lot from someone, based off of what they consider to be their key values or their key traits. So when you think about your career and where you are right now, what traits really do you value, and what four values do you have in life, in business, just in your areas? What do you really consider important?
Well, for me, the values that I really cherish the most are caring, kindness, and class. I think if you can carry yourself with all three of those things in mind, I think you'll do well. Throw a dash of humility in there, and that can't hurt you. One of my favorite expressions is, as you go through life, there are two kinds of people: those who have been humbled and those who are about to be.
I love it.
Yeah. So I think if you keep those things in mind, as in terms of values, what should direct you in terms of your decision making. Obviously, you want to have integrity in whatever you do, particularly as a leader, because you're going to be judged basically on how you carry yourself. Leadership is more about really being than knowing or doing. I think people will resonate first with you as a leader and the kind of values you convey before they really buy into your message. So you have to lead by example. I think that's the most important lesson of all. You have to carry yourself in a way that people are looking at you all the time, and you have to really lead by example.
Yeah, if you want people to follow you, you really have to set that path.
Exactly right.
And help them understand. And with that in mind, I know one of your, big areas of expertise, and we've worked together and known each other for a long time, is strategic planning,
right,
and also educating the youth and the next generation of healthcare leaders.
Right.
So currently you're serving as an adjunct professor
Right.
at the University of Pittsburgh. And can you just talk a little bit about why you find that position so exciting and what you love about working with, the young MHA students at the University of Pittsburgh?
No, good. I'm glad you brought that up, because I really love what I do in terms of teaching. It's a way to give back. Most importantly, I think you and I both got our start through the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health with the master's degrees that we both received there. And so it really launched our careers. And I always believe that, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to the university for the experience that I've gotten, the education that I've gotten. So for me, it's important to give back, either through time, talent, or treasure. And so I have an opportunity to teach, which I'm very grateful for. And you get a rare ability to impact the lives and future careers of students that you're working with. And you get a chance to shape and mold their thinking going forward. And some of the things I really try to focus on with the students is that hard work never goes out of style. And I think what's going to be required going forward is we're in the business of caring for people, even in an administrative capacity. you have an ability to, while you're not a direct caregiver, you have the ability to support those who do give direct care. So even in that capacity, you need to show some empathy. And I think what's also required nowadays is to be very analytical. The healthcare business, as you know, is very, very complex. We need good thinkers, good problem solvers. So teaching gives me an ability to help craft those kind of skills in the students that I teach.
You mentioned analytical ability being very important in today's environment. Right now things are changing so dramatically, and we're really entering in a new phase in healthcare, or I don't think anyone can really predict what's coming next. But one of the questions I often get asked, especially by early careerists at ACHE or HFMA, is, what skills and traits are going to be important for me as the young leader as I move into the area? What classes should I be taking? What should I be doing? Do you have any advice or counsel for our listeners, individuals that are graduate students, other than the analytical knowledge? What should they be preparing? What should they be doing?
Well, I don't think it hurts to have some knowledge of finance. In our business, particularly nowadays, it really comes down. The reimbursement system is going to drive the change that will continue to occur in the business. So having some knowledge of finance and reimbursement, can't hurt you. Having some familiarity with IT, information technology, is I think valuable. And of course, the human component of all of this. Most of what we do as leaders is to get work done through other people. And so I think there's a real skill set there in terms of being able to motivate and inspire people to pursue a common vision, so that as an employee, you know how your job contributes to the success of the overall enterprise.
Absolutely. It's so important to understand how you fit into the larger picture of the healthcare organization and know what your role is and how that interacts. And one thing that you mentioned earlier, I think so important as well, is we all are indirect patient caregivers in healthcare. Even as consultants, business owners, what we do indirectly impacts the patients. So I think that message to the young early careers is, even though you may be working in finance, you may be working in a revenue cycle, what you're doing in your individual role is going to have an indirect impact. So we all have hands on patients, regardless of what our actual roles are.
I think it's very important to always keep focused on who you serve. One of my favorite expressions is an old Rotary expression: service above self. And I think if you can be a selfless leader, I think you're going to have more success. There's the old adage: people won't care too much about what you know until they know how much you care about them and their lives. And when you have that kind of rapport and buy-in from people, you're going to have success. There's another old adage that I like, and that is, if you take care of the people, they'll take care of your mission, whatever that may be.
I agree. It's so true. And I think a lot of times we're always talking about the mission of healthcare and focusing in on that. And one of your key roles, within the University of Pittsburgh, also, one of the roles at Revenue Cycle Solutions is you do a lot of strategy work. So can you talk about why strategy is so important in today's environment, and then a few tips for healthcare executives? I know strategic plans of the past, where it was a 3-ring binder that you would get and set on the shelf and never open it again. Those days are in the past.
That's correct.
It's a very different environment today, and it's changing very quickly.
There's no question that the business is there's incredible change throughout the business, and I think it's very important to really try to study where the business is going. And what I say is, jump the life cycle curve or the learning curve, and try to get ahead of that in some way, so that you're in a position to address the needs of the population, address their healthcare needs when there's demand for those needs. And I warn people, because change is so hard, not to do things that are going to recapture the past, because you've just lived it. And it's easy to gravitate back. How do we get back to the way we were when we were better, the good old days? You can't get there from here anymore. You have to continually look for ways to make yourself better. And there can be no improvement and no progress without change. So you have to be open-minded and be able to embrace change, because without it, if you're not changing, you're not really moving forward. And I also coach lacrosse for St. Vincent College, and with the new players who come on board, every year I ask them one question: if you're going to do one thing to make yourself better, what will that be? And I get all kinds of answers, like I'm going to hustle, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to be more diligent in the skills drills. And I say I'm looking for one word, and very rarely do they get it. And the word that I'm looking for is change. You're going to have to change something about what you do. Something has to be different if you're going to move forward and improve.
It's such a great message, because I feel whenever organizations start to struggle, or even people start to struggle, our natural instinct is to go back to what worked in the past.
Right.
And that's such a dangerous calculation and status quo for healthcare organizations, because what worked in the past isn't going to work in the future.
That's very true. Now you can go back to the fundamentals in terms of certain skill sets that are applicable. But it's very important to continually look and study the future, particularly market analysis. Everything you do needs to be driven by community needs. You talk about population health and moving from volume to value. That really is knowing what is needed by the population you serve.
It's so important. And I know that in your career you've had a few situations where possibly organizations were struggling too much to hold on to the past, and they held on to the past a little bit too long, actually to their detriment. And in those situations, it can really be difficult. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with a local Pittsburgh hospital that unfortunately took a few wrong turns over an extended period of time in Bronzeville Hospital, and what happened there?
Yeah, I was at Brownsville General Hospital for about 3.5 years, and one of the lessons learned in that is that if you're not careful about your strategic planning and knowing what the market is telling you, what story is the market telling you, can end up with nothing. And so when I went into Brownsville General Hospital as the CEO, I knew it was going to be a tough assignment. And within the first couple of weeks, I actually had to lay off about a dozen people. And then a few months thereafter, I had to take about 50 people from full-time to part-time status. And again, as you looked at the trending for the prior 5 years, all the inpatient volume trending was declining. And so I knew that a change had to be made. So I initiated discussions with a local hospital, bigger, with more sophisticated services. And I thought, if we had an affiliation or merger with that entity, then we can focus on the things that were needed by the community. And inpatient services were not one of those things. What was needed was more outpatient services, like lab and x-ray, urgent care, potentially ED, and mental health services. We were the largest mental health provider at that time in the county. So I wanted to focus on those services because that's what the community was telling us was really, really needed. But the board had the thinking that they wanted to recapture the past. And the thinking there was that we're only a physician or two away from being what we were a few years ago.
Just recruit the right number of physicians and our volume will go back to where it was.
Well, that was bucking the trend because physicians were leaving, not coming. So my thought was we had to metamorphosize ourselves into something different. And the board was not ready to buy that kind of a concept. And one of the lessons learned for me in all of that was that as convincing a person as I think I am, it probably would have been good for me to bring in some outside help, that profit from another land kind of concept to help convey, what were some of the changes going on in other areas of the country that would be harbingers of things to come for us. Because we were a small hospital, and I think we were impacted and buffeted by the winds of change early in this dynamic business. So it was a hard lesson to learn. In the end, the board determined that it was going to sell to a group of physicians, and I disagreed with that move. And by that time, I had already accepted another job, but I did stay on long enough to make the transition happen for them. But sadly, within about a year of my leaving, the hospital closed.
Well, it sounds like Brownsville General Hospital really was experiencing a lot of the similar trends that community hospitals are having today. Declining inpatient volumes, the shift to more radiology, laboratory, urgent care services. So I think there are a lot of lessons to learn there, for current organizations.
Well, there's no question about that. And, what you're seeing now is a lot of innovation and disruption in the business, because what we have right now is unsustainable from a cost standpoint. When you look at where we are as an industry relative to the gross national product, it's approaching 20%. And that's not going to be sustainable longer term. So, we need to look at both the expense reduction and revenue enhancement components of the business. We've talked in the past about how simple the equation is, revenues exceeding expenses, but the execution of that formula is very difficult, because hospitals are so complex, even smaller ones. The smallest hospitals are very complex entities when you're talking about 50, 60, 100 departments that you have to coordinate, depending upon the size of the hospital. It's very complicated to do that. And so, executing a sound strategy for a successful bottom line can be very difficult.
It absolutely can. I think when you're looking at what's occurring in healthcare in those environments, the equation is so simple, but how do you balance everything and make sure you have the right components and steps? And I think you talked about profit from another land when you were referring to Brownsville General Hospital. And I think, a lot of times organizations, when they're struggling, are resistant to bring in outside expertise for fear of that making them look weaker. Can you talk a little bit, about that and what role outside expertise can play whenever you're with the board and you're talking about some of those changes?
I think it can be very valuable. Now, in the past, I was always more of a do-it-yourselfer, but I did have enough wisdom to realize that at times, if I didn't have the expertise or my team didn't have the expertise, it was okay to bring in outside help. Now, there can be some thinking that the board may have an image of you that, well, aren't we paying you to do that, and shouldn't you know that? Well, again, the business is so complex that as a CEO, you're going to know a little bit about a lot of things. No question, that's what you have to do, and you have to coordinate a lot of different entities. But sometimes it's good to bring in certain expertise that maybe the skill set of your team is not adequate enough, and it's okay to do that. And to me, I didn't care where the next best idea came from, as long as the solution was good for the overall enterprise. Okay, I didn't care if it came from outside the organization or. The first thing I think you do is look internally, certainly. And I've often said that your employee base is probably the best and cheapest consulting service you'll ever have. And you need to tap into the wisdom of your workforce, first and foremost.
Absolutely. One of the fascinating things that happens in the work that we do at ALTIUS is, we'll be on site for the organizational assessment. We'll start engaging the managers and employees, and some of the ideas that come out of those conversations that were sitting latent with that organization have dramatic changes that can occur. So just asking people what their ideas are and then using that to propel things forward can give you a lot of momentum.
Well, you remind me of an old Steelers story that I had heard about Terry Bradshaw. This was back in the day when quarterbacks could call their own plays. They're not getting it from electronic headset. So the story goes that in certain games, Bradshaw would come back to the huddle and he'd ask the guys, well, who's got what? Who can do what? And Stallworth and Lynn and Franco Harris would say, I'm open, or I can get open. And so he didn't care where the next best play came from. So it built team camaraderie, that everybody was in this together, everybody can contribute, and I think that was important and a good story.
Yeah, and sometimes as the player, you can see things that the coach or quarterback cannot.
Correct.
So everyone being involved is always a great outcome.
Correct. In fact, there's another story that I'm reminded of. This happened maybe 20 or so years ago. There was actually a plane crash in St. Louis, and some lives were lost, but the majority of the passengers were saved. And when they explored the black box and listened to what the recording in the cockpit, it was fascinating. They really could not tell who was in charge. So even in a situation in crisis, there were people that they worked as a team, that the best ideas didn't matter where they came from, as long as they came up with the right solution to solve the problem.
Great story. Love that. So let's talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions, because you mentioned Brownsville General, and the fact that had they had the right outcome, they would have next been looking for a partner or looking for an affiliation or a larger organization to actually merge with that could help support that facility and or affiliate with.
Correct.
Are there any creative examples or unique strategies that you think community hospitals or organizations should be looking at in today's environment? Or are there any strategies that you've seen that are really successful?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of ways to approach this between different kinds of organizations. You see a lot of service line affiliations, coordination, that kind of thing. And of course, I think over the last 20 years, there have been at times different movements toward affiliation and merger. You're seeing consolidation throughout the business, particularly on the provider side. Now, I've worked, and you and I both have worked with one hospital in particular, Warren General Hospital, where we were both in helping them strategize what their future could be. And first and foremost, we looked at helping them operationally stabilize and improve their bottom line. You from an expense reduction, labor optimization standpoint, me from a revenue enhancement, revenue cycle standpoint. So that helped initially, and then strategy-wise, and I know the CEO very well, he's a good friend, I worked with him to help convince his board that status quo was not going to be acceptable going forward. So we actually worked with local systems, namely UPMC and Highmark AHN, to solicit proposals. And the organization, Warren General, ended up selecting Highmark AHN as its affiliate partner. And it's a unique partnership in that Highmark AHN has taken a minority equity position in the hospital, and that was acceptable to Warren General in exchange for a large infusion of capital and cash, which the hospital needed to invest in itself, invest in its infrastructure, invest in its pension plans, and it's a good story for both the local hospital and for Highmark AHN. And the nice thing about it too, this kind of partnership enables the local hospital to maintain some local control, local identity, a culture that is right for that community, where it's still got a small town feel to it, but is now affiliated with a larger entity, which provides security and stability going forward. So I think it's a good story for both entities.
Yeah, it's a very creative model that I haven't read a lot about lately, and something I think we're going to see a lot more of is the minority stake that gives the larger system an ownership role in the facility. However, the local facility is able to maintain that autonomy.
Well, sometimes when there's a complete merger, you have what I call corporatization of that smaller entity, where you sometimes lose the local touch, the local feel, the hometown neighborhood culture. And I think for Warren General, they've been able to maintain that largely through the work of their CEO, who's been very in touch with the community, local businesses, keeping them apprised of how to secure a better future. And I think that's what's occurred there.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. So with mergers and acquisitions and physician practices, can you talk a little bit about how revenue cycle is really important, and why that matters?
Yeah, the revenue cycle is a complex series of events that occurs when a patient presents him or herself to the hospital or the physician practice. And so the series of events can entail pre-registration, validation of insurance, collection of copays and deductibles up front. That's what you call the patient access component. To charge capture, revenue integrity, that's the middle of the revenue cycle, and all the way to the back end, which is called patient financial services, and that really entails mostly billing and collections. And so it's a complicated series of events, and in that process, it's very easy to lose money because change is happening all the time. In fact, one very astute CFO mentioned to me years ago that the revenue cycle is never ever completely fixed. There's always changes in reimbursement, changes in coding. A number of years ago, we went from ICD-10 or ICD-9 to ICD-10. That's the International Classification of Diseases, from iteration 9 to 10. Now I understand that in a couple of years' time, we're going to be moving to ICD-11. And that means another explosion of codes, more complexity in the business. And so it's important to pay attention to those kind of trends. And actually, we recommend that your revenue cycle should be assessed every 2 to 3 years, just to make sure that you're in tune with what's happened, the trending that's gone on, so that you can keep pace with that and have more of an assurance that money's not dropping off the table, that you're, again, capturing every penny of financial credit for all the clinical work that you do. You've earned it, you deserved it, now you should get it, okay?
Have to collect it. I think there's so many places in the revenue cycle process that money can just drop out and fall off the table. One funny story is I was sitting in a waiting room waiting to meet with an executive team, and a patient actually went up to the window with a check and said, "Hey, I want to pay my copay and deductible. How much do I owe you?" And they said, "Oh, we don't take checks here." And there's a patient, check in hand, wants to pay for the service, and they're just turned away.
Well, that's one of the recommendations that we make, because it's common practice in physician offices to do that, to collect before a service is rendered. And hospitals are going to need to get in touch with that and get more conversant with it, more comfortable with it, because that's the trend. And it's important because with high deductible insurance plans where you have deductibles of $5,000-$10,000, it's almost like not having insurance. That's more for catastrophic purposes. So that means for the hospital it's harder to collect, because more of the burden is now being placed on the person, on the individual, to pay upfront copays and deductibles, and when they don't, that puts a burden on the hospital to collect. So they're going to have to get more comfortable with collecting upfront.
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about disruption earlier and some of the changes that are happening there. Are there any really innovative things, or what are some of the major recommendations that you're seeing that are happening in the revenue cycle business? What's happening? What should people be aware of? What do our listeners need to know?
Well, one of the things that we almost always recommend when we do an assessment of a revenue cycle is to move resources from the back end to the front end. Okay,
Oh, that's a great idea.
Because if you can fix problems up front, you'll have a better fix, an earlier fix, a more cost-effective fix, as opposed to waiting for those issues to build, and then all of a sudden you're fixing problems downstream where they become more complicated, and it's going to be more costly to fix those. So that's certainly one of our most paramount recommendations. And also we also recommend that every organization have a revenue cycle steering committee meeting, monthly meeting, so that all the components of the revenue cycle are coordinated. And so there's some self-accountability when you have that kind of a process. Managers will hold themselves accountable for different tasks, so that the revenue cycle is a very coordinated effort.
I think that's an important recommendation, because bringing all of these stakeholders together and having a plan around how you're going to collect money, which is, we talked about that simple equation,
Right.
revenue versus expenses, but how you're going to collect that money is really important. And the other piece I want to touch on there is you mentioned, start at the front end.
Right.
Because there's so much rework and redundancy that happens. Right now we're talking a lot about waste in healthcare.
Correct.
And I think estimates point that 1 out of every $3 that's spent on healthcare is still waste.
Correct.
So that's rework when you have to register a patient for the second time, or register a patient for the third time, or post a claim again because the birth date's wrong.
Well, that's very true, and lean management principles have to be applied to the entire enterprise, and specifically for the revenue cycle, as you mentioned. There's waste throughout, and there is certainly waste within the revenue cycle itself. So a lean management process will help you identify what is of value and what is waste. Where are the bottlenecks? Where's the duplication? Okay, where can you streamline things? So those concepts are very important to apply not only to the entire enterprise, but also to the revenue cycle.
And when we're talking about revenue cycle and disruption, we also see disruption in a lot of other areas. We could go through all of the companies that are disrupting things right now, from Apple to Google to Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, AI initiatives.
Right.
There's disruption every place we look. And I think everyone in healthcare would agree, healthcare in 20 years is not going to look anything like it does today, nor does it look anything like it did 20 years ago today.
Right.
So how would you advise boards and executives to prepare for what's coming down the pike? What do our listeners, what do stakeholders need to do to make sure that they're staying on top of the innovation, staying on top of the things, and really embracing the change management?
Well, I think any organization on the provider side, you need to really pay attention to what's happening in the business, not try to recapture the past, and then once you have some idea of where the business is going, and this is what in the realm of research and development, you really want to pay attention to the market. What is the market really telling you? What are the needs that are specifically occurring in your community? The community behavioral health needs assessment is a great tool that I think hospitals have to do every couple of years to continue to get Medicare reimbursement. That's a very valuable tool to tap into what the community is saying that they absolutely need. And then once you are able to identify those needs, then you're less likely to try to recapture the past.
Sure.
And then you can start to craft a vision of a more compelling future. Okay, what does the future look like when you consider the trending that's going on? And that's a skill in and of itself, a real skill for true leaders, to be able to paint a vivid picture of the vision of where you want to take the organization.
Vision is so important and often overlooked. Organizations that do not have a vision that can be easily communicated really falter. Right. And I think when you're talking about strategic planning and you're talking about the future of healthcare organization, I think vision has to be one of the 3 steps that any healthcare executive has to be very clear on in order to make sure that they're able to embrace the future.
Well, I think that's probably, if one of the most, if not the most important skill of a CEO, and that is to craft a vision. Where there is no vision, the people perish. And so, and what's interesting there to me, Stephanie, is that whether you're running a whole hospital or a department, you need to craft a vision for your particular enterprise, department. And then you need to convey that vision in a way that people understand how what they do contributes to the collective success of that piece of the organization. Everyone needs to know that. So that's a critically important piece for any leader to be able to convey.
Yeah, I heard a staggering statistic earlier this week, and the statistic was that I believe 82 or 83% of healthcare workers have turned over in the average organization since 2013.
Wow.
So if you think about the fact that the average hospital has lost 80% of their staff over the last 6 years and had to retrain and orient that entire staff over and over again, you think about vision, and had those organizations communicated the vision a little bit better and showed all of those employees what their role was in the organization, how important they were, I wonder if maybe that number could have been pushed down a little bit.
That's a great point, and that's a staggering number when you think about it. And then you go to the cost of that turnover. It's much easier to retain employees than it is to recruit and train new ones. And I think that's where having open communication, a lot of transparency in an organization will help. People always want to know what's the score. Another lesson that I learned was back in the day when I worked at St. Francis Hospital. It used to be the largest provider of healthcare in Western Pennsylvania, and through a series of really miscalculations, the facility failed. And the nuns ran it, wonderful people who had a wonderful, wonderful mission, and that was to take care of people without regard to their ability to pay, particularly the poor. But there's the expression, no margin, no mission, and they really failed to keep an eye on that, thinking that maybe the public would bail them out or the insurance companies would come to their rescue, and that did not happen. And they could have been more transparent with where the hospital was financially, because I think if you are transparent, even in bad times, distressed times, if you're honest and transparent with people, they'll hang in there with you, and they'll make good decisions. And it also shows that you care about them. You care enough about them to be honest and open with what's happening in the organization. You're not hiding anything from them. And if you do that, you develop a sense of trust. And more likely than not, they'll hang in there with you during tough times.
And Mike, I think that almost goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Values have to remain caring and compassionate, with your leaders, and make sure that you're caring and compassionate with your employees.
And what I do in terms of teaching, I really emphasize the value of and the importance of mission, vision, and values. And in my experience, there have been very few organizations that really focus on those continually. Most times organizations go through a laborious exercise of developing mission, vision, and value statements where every word means something, and they do. But then when that exercise is done, they typically put those statements in a binder and put them on a shelf and don't revisit those. Whereas they should continually be revisited, and all your important decisions should tie into those statements somehow, some way. I worked at Jefferson Hospital for a time. Wonderful hospital, great people, and one of the things that impressed me most was the fact that their mission, vision, and value statements were posted in the boardroom. So as a constant reminder that all of their decisions had to connect somehow, some way to those statements. And I think if you do that, you're not going to get off course too frequently. You're always going to be reminded that you need to work within the confines of those statements.
Yeah, I think that is one of the hallmark, signatures of good organizations and successful organizations, is that decisions are based off of the founding principles of the mission, vision, and values.
I think if you can, adhere to those, you're going to be in good shape. Now, particularly, your mission and values. Now, the vision can change somewhat by virtue of the dynamic changing business, okay, that we're in. You might have to have a bit of a different strategy, longer term. Strategic plans anymore only last 2 to 3 years, and then you're on. Then you might have to create another vision. As I suggested to you, my vision for Brownsville General Hospital had changed. At first, when I came on board, it was, okay, I'm going to be tasked to stabilize the place and continue the vision that was basically handed to me. Well, over a short period of time, I realized that vision is not going to work. It needs to change, and we need to have different strategies and tactics in order to support a new vision.
I think that's very parallel to one of the things that we teach, when we're going through labor management engagements is, when you're going down the course and you're, making changes, sometimes those changes aren't going to work. And whenever you need to adjust, you have to revisit your vision. You have to change what you're doing. Same thing with labor management or change. If you know what you're doing's not working, don't continue to push a failing situation. Pivot.
Yeah.
Change quickly, address it, move forward.
Now, that's a really, really good point, because you can't be afraid to make some change. And obviously, you need to base those changes on some sound information. But if it's not working, then you need to do a mid-course correction. And you always have to have contingency plans built in.
Yes.
What's Plan B in case Plan A does not work for whatever reason? And it really alludes to my thinking about making mistakes. Make them, admit them, and fix them. Okay?
Fail your way to success.
And then move on, okay? Don't try to cover up or hide anything, because then the cover-up becomes more egregious than the initial mistake.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about different topics. And, one of the things I'd like to end up and wrapped up with is really give some value to the listeners on today's environment. And if you were sitting in a CEO role, or you were brought in, what do you really think is important for organizational success in today's environment? How are good organizations run today? What do they need to do? And what are those hallmarks?
Well, I think it's a number of things. It's a complex equation, and multifactorial solutions need to be applied. Obviously, you want to pay attention to your operations, even as a not-for-profit. You need to show a positive bottom line, and in doing so, that means you have to be lean and mean across the board, no matter what kind of enterprise organization that you're involved in. That's just the nature of our business. There's going to be less money, not more, and so you need to be innovative in the pursuit of that positive bottom line. And again, we mentioned revenue enhancement, expense reduction. Those are critically important. Having a vision and being in touch with your employees. One of my favorite expressions is be visible and in touch, particularly when things aren't going that well. All right, you want to really engage your entire workforce. An engaged workforce is one that's going to stay on board with you. There's not going to be turnover. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you need to have a vision for every component of the organization so that everyone knows the score, everyone knows where you're going, everyone feels as though they have buy-in, they have ownership. I think it's important for every person to have ownership of the organization so that they feel they're a part of your success and they can contribute to it going forward.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. This has been really enjoyable. Is there anything you haven't shared with the audience that you would like to share before we commence?
Well, there's a favorite book that I have by Patrick Lencioni. He's one of my favorite business authors, called The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive. And there are a couple of postulates that he offers, and one is that the success of an organization is predicated on the cohesiveness of the senior management team. Not that everybody has to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but you have to have enough respect for one another to have constructive debate so that you get the best ideas on the table. And then the second thing that he offers is that he raises the question, would you rather have a smart organization or a healthy one? A smart organization is one that has all of its policies and procedures well aligned. Everybody knows where they are. Everybody knows what they are. And a healthy organization is one where, to the extent possible, politics is minimized. Employees know they're engaged and they know how they contribute to the success of the organization. And the conclusion is you'd rather be a healthy organization because a healthy organization will make itself smarter. And if you have that kind of cohesion within the organization, good things will happen.
I like that a lot. Well, let's tell the audience, how they can find you. Where should they look for Revenue Cycle Solutions, and what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, there's a lot of information on our website, www.revenuecyclesolutions.com, and a wealth of information there about our company and how to contact us.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And for everyone else, please keep in mind to keep looking for ALTIUS Answers. We will be releasing podcasts on a consistent basis. And also, if you're looking for more information on how ALTIUS can support your organization, please go to www.altiushcg.com and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. Thanks a lot.